Okay, this is my post-fight thoughts with regards to George Groves versus Carl Froch, or Carl Froch versus George Groves. My prediction was that George Groves, during this fight, would have given Carl Froch all the problems he could handle, but eventually, between rounds 9 and 10, Groves would slow down and Carl Froch would make the big breakthrough, even coming from behind. And I think I stated this in my pre-fight prediction. Now, after I did that pre-fight prediction on the beautiful beach of Grenada in Grenada, I went and did a bit more research, and I got a email from a good friend in the UK, and he told me that George Groves and Carl Froch had a sparring session beforehand. And there are two versions of this sparring session. Version number one is that Carl Froch dropped George Groves. Version number two is George Groves dropped Carl Froch got up and then put a pasting on George Groves, which ended up being a full-blown boxing match instead of just being a sparring session. So there has been a history between the two fighters before the fight was announced. So there was some bad blood beforehand. So this was no hype. This was actually, and I was going to mention something about it before the ringside show, but I thought, you know what, leave it, let it be. Because again, it's rumours and whatever. But I wanted to make that point. So I was always aware and was fully aware that Groves had the power to drop Carl Froch. So when Carl Froch got dropped in the first round, it was of no surprise to me. I was surprised to a lot of people, but not to me. Froch has never had the greatest balance. He's had shocking defense that has got away with a lot because of that cast iron chin that he's got. And Groves controlled the fight and did very well. The stoppage was appalling. However, like I stated in a previous video regarding contracts, I understand that George Groves is actually under Matchroom as a promotional deal and not a contracted fighter, whereas Carl Froch is, which basically means, in my estimation, what I think, take it or leave it, I don't know the truth because obviously again I don't live in the UK anymore, but this is my thoughts and this is my channel. But I think George Groves, if he's coming from the school of thought from the Adam Booth, David Hay, we'll do it our way of thinking, George Groves potentially beating Carl Froch and having no commitment to Eddie Hearn, meaning no contract signed, George Groves would have been open to have had a deal with the other networks and could have gone to the highest bidder, being a world champion. So it was important, as far as I'm concerned, to protect the best interests of Matchroom and their fighter, Carl Froch, who is contracted. Like I said, had Carl Froch and George Groves both been contracted, I believe we could have seen a different outcome in the fight. Now, there's a few things I want to touch on upon this fight. Inexperience in George Groves' part. And I'll say this. It doesn't look good as a fighter when you're backing up against the ropes and your head is like that against the ropes and you're like that. And for me, George Groves throughout his career so far has been one who has thrown out punches and knocked guys over, and when the punches are coming back, it's a different situation altogether. Now, I'm not saying Froch is a one-punch knockout artist. But what I will tell you is that when Groves was on the ropes, he kept doing this. So, bearing in mind, if you're taking it from the perspective of an individual or a referee that is contracted or has an affiliation with the promoter of the night, and his promotion's main agenda is to look after the fighter that is under contract, which is Carl Froch, then by any means necessary, whether it be a draw on the judge's scorecard, whether it be points deducted off the other fighter, whether it be to jump in as soon as there's an opportunity that's there to get Carl Froch into a position where he wins the fight. because Froch was behind on the score hard. Let's make no mistake about it. And Groves was putting a good beating on Carl Froch, okay? But here's another thing. There's a thing, somebody said that, oh, George Groves has now made it into world class. Hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. Carl Froch, as we all know, has been fighting a long time with his chin, and he's fighting a long time making fights difficult. He makes fights difficult because his style is not one that is about defense and slipping punches and moving out of the way. His style is about hit and continue getting hit and hit you back. That's Carl Froch's style. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Carl Froch is not about sticking on the end of a jab and keeping you outside of a jab and throwing right hands and left hooks and keeping you outside. Froch will engage you whenever because he's a hard man. And so boxing science, the sweet science of sport, Froch isn't that. He's exciting, don't get me wrong. Love to see him fight. But the shortcomings are anybody who is technically sound, Froch is going to struggle with. And you saw that against Groves. Now where's my point and where I'm going with this? With Carl Froch. Yes, wear and tear. Froch spars hard. Froch pushes his body to the limit. And he fights hard. Wear and tear. How much did Carl Froch have in the tank left coming into George Groves' fight? Now to me, Froch looked like a shot fighter. That's my view of it. He looked a shot fighter. He looked like he couldn't put it together anymore. He was trying but couldn't get it to put it together. And it was because George Groves slowed down a touch is why Froch was able to get himself in position to land the punch that he did. And I always thought that Froch would catch up with Groves later on in the fight. Just my opinion. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying Froch looked shot. He did not look as sharp. He did not look like he had wherewithal. And the way he was dropped was very hard by George Groves. And for me, I would suggest for Carl Froch to retire. Think about this. On the table, Froch could fight GGG. And do you really want to see Golovkin landing right hands on Froch's chin like that? And the next person is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Both fights are fights that I particularly want to see Froch in. Exciting fights, yes. Big money fights, yes. But when I think about Carl Froch and the exciting nights he's given us and the amount of times he's been hit on that chin, I think about what will Carl Froch look like in 10 years' time. That's my concern now. You know, Carl Froch has given us some wonderful nights, but I think he needs to retire. But Froch is so arrogant in the way that he is. Froch is one of these guys that you have to knock out to retire. And I think until he's knocked out, he's the impression I get, he's one of these guys who believes he cannot be knocked out. But when he gets knocked out clean, I mean, knocked out flat on the canvas, he may then consider retirement. That's the impression I get from Carl Froch. And the argument about Joe Calzaghe and Carl Froch, come on. There's no argument. Joe Calzaghe went up and fought a light heavyweight, right? And he fought Roy Jones and Bernard Hopkins. And even now, Froch won't fight Bernard Hopkins. Even now, he won't step up to light heavyweight. He wouldn't go up to light heavyweight and fight Nathan Cleverly. Could you imagine what Roy Jones would have done with Froch? You know, I think to myself, Froch is open to right hands all night long. And Roy's best punch was the right hand. But for me, Joe Calzaghe, if he's struggling, if Froch is struggling with the speed of George Groves, could you imagine the hand speed of someone like Joe Calzaghe coming in and out throwing punches? And he fought prime, legit, undefeated world champion in Kessler. I can't see it somehow. I can't see how Carl Froch beats Joe Calzaghe. And you've probably heard it before, he's been very hypocritical. He said of Froch. He's a young upstart, and who is he? But who was Carl Froch when he was running up his gums and saying what he had to say to Joe Kawasaki? Remember those times? And when he rang Joe Kawasaki up and asked him for a fight, and Joe was just dismissive of him. I don't know. Carl Froch is a good fighter. All-time great? No. And I think he should retire. As for the stoppage, I think that, as I said before, the difference between somebody being contracted and somebody being promoted. And from what I understand, George Groves is a free agent now. I don't know. Will the rematch happen? I don't think it will. Because I don't think Froch could do anything any better. I don't think he can. George Groves will grow from this fight. You know, I know people are saying, yeah, let's get him to fight Andre Ward. I'm not sure George is ready for that. Somebody like that. I'd like to see, me personally, I'd like to see George Groves fight someone like Saki Abika. Another tough, hard man that can punch and can take a good shot and keep coming. Saki Abika versus George Groves. That would be a fight I'd love to see. And if I were George Groves, I'd be shooting for that fight. I don't really think that Eddie Hearn wants to see that fight again, and they will move Froch, I don't think, away from that, and more likely to see a fourth Kessler fight, third Kessler fight, sorry, or GGG, Golovkin. And they would say that a Golovkin fight is more marketable than a Groves fight. Just saying. And Froch will say, well, why do I need to fight him again? I beat him once. I stopped him once. I'll stop him again. That's what Froch will say. Froch will say, I didn't stop the fight. The referee stopped the fight. And he's right. Was the stoppage fair? Nah, don't think the stoppage was fair. But Froch will say, I didn't tell the referee what to do. I just did my job. So, when he says that, what can you say? Rematch. Well, Froch will say, why am I going to fight a man that I've beat already? So, it's more likely that Froch's pride and arrogance will take him down the road of GGG. And that night, I think he'll get stretchered out. Because GGG is not just a puncher. He's a very technically good fighter as well. And I think that you're looking at a different situation there. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on that. Froch is way too open. And if I were him, I would retire. But those are my post-fight thoughts. Yeah, what more can you say? But I kind of saw it going that way anyway. The stoppage, would like to see a clean stoppage in such a fantastic fight. And sort of ruined it for fans. But there you go. I'm out.